Hello. Welcome back. This is going to be the basic PC from Unit 1, Part 2. You might have noticed I had a little bit of an improvement since the last time, since yesterday. We're changing some things, make things look a little bit smoother. So we are going to do this Part 2. Give me just 1 second here. All right back. The funs of doing a live stream out of the classroom. So we got the students in here. Guys, hop into YouTube Live. It might or might not be showing up yet. But I do want to talk about the continuation of Unit 1. What we're looking at here are the basic things that we need to be aware of going into some of the more complicated conversations. So, for example, yesterday we talked about binary versus analog. We looked at how to do basic conversion. We saw, take that out because I'm getting echo in my ear. We took a look at the different categories of stuff and all sorts of cool things. So there you go. All right, so let's take a look at our second portion, which focuses on processing. So processing is why we have computers. Before keyboards, before printers, before monitors, before anything else, there was processing. So arguably the very first computer, personal computer, was something called an Altair. And the Altair just was a box with lights and switches that people would flip up and down to get things working. Well, that had a processor in it, right? That was what all of this was about. So before keyboards, printers, any of this, processing was why we had the computers. That's why we did this stuff. Now, processing is the ability to take raw data and basically make sense of it. And going back to our analogy, or not our analogy, but back to our conversation yesterday about zeros and ones, binary, this is what this works with. It crunches the zeros and ones and comes up with something out of that. It makes sense of the raw data. And so microprocessors, you might hear central processing unit, CPUs, or processors, and it's considered the brains of the computer. Now, saying that, some people really have a problem with this analogy. Well, this isn't exactly it's an analogy. It's there to help us understand a more complicated subject matter. And so I do like to use the brain analogy and even expand upon that by thinking about the brain and the nervous system to get a grasp of how information is sent throughout the computer. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So the central CPU, or the central processor, CPU, is considered the brains of the computer. And there are two main companies for home consumers. Now, there are other CPU manufacturers out there, but when you go to the store right now and you go to buy a new computer or a new motherboard or a new CPU, one of the first questions you're going to be asked is AMD or Intel. These are the two big brands of CPUs currently on the market. Sitting on top of a CPU is something known as a heat sink. This is there to suck the heat off of the CPU. CPUs get very hot, and so heat sinks help remove that heat from the top of the CPU. Now, this is our intro unit, right? This is our Unit 1, the basic PC. We will go into this in much more detail. We have an entire unit just on CPUs. And within that unit, we will take a look at heat sinks, just like we're going to have an entire unit on motherboards and an entire 2 units on storage devices. So we go into this in much more detail as we go through. So heatsink pulls the heat away from the CPU. It's actually known as passive cooling. Opposite of that are things called fans, which are more active cooling. This requires electricity to run, and it helps the heatsink do its job, as well as keeps the other parts of the computer cool, because you find fans on top of the heatsink, but you'll also find them throughout the computer, notably in the case, as well as the power supply. So a fan is active cooling. You need to run power to make it happen. You have something called OEM. This is original equipment manufacturer. OEM fans come usually from the manufacturer when you buy the CPU. So if you go and buy an AMD CPU off the shelf or an Intel CPU off the shelf, you're going to have the heat sink most likely in the box with a fan that you can use. There are third parties that you can purchase if you are so interested in. And we'll take a look at that in more detail when we talk about the CPU unit. Then we have something called liquid-based cooling. Liquid-based cooling is, you might have heard of water cooling. It doesn't necessarily need to be water, but it usually is. And it goes through these pipes and these tubes and all this other stuff, and it sucks the heat off of devices that typically get very hot. For example, the CPU or maybe even the graphic processor unit. By the way, kind of fun little thing for you. If you have a micro center in your community, first of all, don't go there unless you have money to spend, because I barely ever get out of there without spending a couple of bucks. But they have an entire aisle of water cooling, of liquid cooling products. It is very, very, very cool and worth checking out. Again, if you have a micro center near you, go check it out. I live in the Houston area, so we do the Houston Micro Center. Okay, so continuing our look now, we have motherboards. All computer components must connect either directly or indirectly to the motherboard. It is considered the backbone of the computer. Everything, like I said, connects either directly or indirectly to it. Let's see here. Moving on, if you ever take a look at a motherboard and take a look past just the outer shell of the motherboard and look at the board itself, you're going to see that it's made of a special material. This material is known as printed circuit board, or PCB. If the CPU can be the brains of the computer, then the parts in the motherboard, those wires that connect everything, are kind of like the nervous system and the nerves that go around the entire body to collect information and send information out. And we'll take a much closer look at all of this when we get to the processing unit. Like I said, we are just kind of skimming the surface here. On the motherboard itself, you have things called expansion slots. Expansion slots are what you plug in expansion cards to. In the very, very early days of computers, there really wasn't a lot of integrated equipment on there. There was no integrated video. There was no integrated sound. There was no integrated modem. You had to buy expansion cards for every part of that computer in order, well, not every part, but every kind of additional function that you wanted. A lot of functionality has been integrated into the motherboard. And so expansion slots still exist, but you might have a computer where you don't put anything in them. And we will take a look at expansion slots in much more detail when we get to the motherboard unit. So desktop motherboards have at least one expansion slot. You might have more. Like I said, expansion slots are there to add some functionality to the computer. And examples of expansion cards could include network interface cards, otherwise known as NICs, video cards, audio card, RAID controllers, and much, much more. Okay, so that is processing in a nutshell. I just want you to know, when we talk about processing, what is the CPU? What is the motherboard? What is the motherboard made out of? What are heat sinks? What are fans? Because when we build off of that and get to their individual units, I don't have to go back and explain, the very, very basics. Okay, so this gives us a working kind of a knowledge. All right, now taking a look at storage. Storage is the ability to store, retain data either temporary or quote unquote permanently. And I use permanently in quotations because we will talk more about data backup and hard drive failures and all this other stuff in their units. And I have two separate units just on the working with storage, implementing storage, getting all these to work. And I have another unit just on external storage devices. So like thumb drives and cards. So storage can take the place of hard drives, RAM, floppy drives, CDs, optical drives, flash drives, etc., etc. Data is stored either magnetically, optically, or on something called a solid state drive. So hard drives. Now, in the previous video, somebody was like, well, it's, you're talking about solid state drives, not technically hard drives. Look, you have hard disk drives, which we're going to take a quick look at and we cover in more detail. And you have solid state drives. But old techies, we call them just hard drives as a general sense, because you're going to go buy a hard drive for the computer and you put it in, and that's when you decide kind of on the internals and how the internals work. Is it going to be a hard disk drive or is it going to be a solid state drive? So when I'm talking about hard drives in general, and I don't make the distinction between a hard disk drive or a solid state drive, I'm talking about storage medium, i.e., kind of the hard drives here. Okay. So, hard drives is where information is stored predominantly on computers. Majority of hard drives are magnetic storage drives, and when we start taking a look at solid state drives, you'll see that we use something different. So, the hard disk drive stores data magnetically on individual disks or platters. The platters are made up of aluminum, glass, or coated with magnetic medium. This technology is incredibly old, although the advancements have been insane in just how much these things can store. Originally, we were looking at megabytes, and now we're in the terabyte range. So it truly is amazing how much technology has increased over the years. So, looking at our next one, which is the solid state drives. Solid state drives have no moving internal components. This is basically kind of like flash memory for inside the computer, which in fact it does use a solid state memory chip like a flash drive. Luckily for us, and also the adoption of solid state drives, it uses the same type of connectors that you would use for hard disk drives. So when you attach a solid state drive to your device, to your computer, you don't have to get different cables if you had a hard disk drive installed previously, which is pretty cool. Now we have something called random access memory, or RAM. RAM is considered volatile. What this means is that when the power goes out, the information on the RAM is wiped. When we have our separate unit on RAM, you're going to learn more about this in detail as far as how we have to apply a charge to the RAM to keep the information. And it's a whole thing. You'll learn about it later on. Optical discs or optical drives. The disc is what you put in the drive, and we had compact discs. This stored music and some data back in the day. Then we had digital versatile discs, the DVDs. The older term is digital video disc, when that's all they stored. And of course, now we have the new high definition optical media, which is Blu-ray. And we have an entire unit that we talk about this, especially with the fact that this has become legacy equipment, and you're going to run into it less and less and less and less. Speaking of running into something less and less and less, we have floppy drives. These are really old technology. You would be hard pressed to find a computer that still uses them. In fact, I believe they don't make floppy drives anymore. They made it for quite some time, even after nobody was using them, but they still existed, but they are no longer being manufactured, from my understanding, unless there's some weird company out there putting these things together. The last version of a floppy drive was a 3.5-inch floppy. And these are, like I said, old technology that can barely hold any information compared to today's standards. So, speaking of today's standards, there are flash drives. Flash drives, like solid state drives, use solid state storage, flash memory to store things. A flash drive is a portable version of a solid state drive that can plug into all sorts of different things. For example, your computer, your digital picture frames, your televisions, and more. We can divide our flash drives into two categories: USB and card-based drives. The USB flash drive is what we're used to. In fact, these things are like everywhere. So, here's a little flash drive that I can plug into a computer and use them. Very, very convenient. But as you're going to discover as we go through this course, a major, major, major security risk. And we'll talk about social engineering and how you too can cause trouble with a thumb drive, a flash drive. Not that you should, but in order to protect organizations, you need to know how to be bad sometimes. So moving on, they're very convenient, but also, like I said, a security concern. The other thing is something called a secure digital or SD card. When I was teaching this way back in the day, there were different competing standards, but SD won. These are card-based drives that you find plugged into digital picture frames. Your smartphone probably has an SD card in there for extra storage. I have a Raspberry Pi in the classroom where its hard drive is basically an SD card with quite a surprising amount of space. And SD cards have really increased in the amount of space that they allow and that they can work with. Then we have external hard drives. These are a cross between flash drives and internal hard drives. They're kind of in the middle, not a cross, but somewhere in the middle between a flash drive and an internal hard drive. You find the external hard drives. These can be enclosed hard disk drives. These can also be enclosed solid state drives. Yes, there absolutely is bad ways you can use flash drives, and we talk about them in the security lesson. In fact, I've even shown my class bad USBs being used before. We have a Flipper Zero that we've shown where if you plug in the Flipper Zero, it can take over your computer very quickly. So we will look at security risks with thumb drives later on after we get through the basic stuff. So you can attach external hard drives via USB or Thunderbolt connections. One of my favorite types of storage is your NASs, your network attached storage. These are external hard drives. They sit in bays of a specially made device. Usually there's a RAID controller on there, so you can set up RAID. We'll look at RAID later. And you're going to run into anywhere between 2, 4, or 6 bays or even more. And of course, you pay the difference. This is a picture of my very first NAS in a house that has since been repainted on the inside. And they're great for small home offices or small office home officers or SOHOs because they allow people who might need more server space or more storage space a reasonable alternative to buying, let's say, an entire server, which gets very, very expensive. All right, let's kind of zip through some basic input devices. So normally we talk about input output in the same breath, usually in the same unit. We are going to split them up a little bit in this presentation so that we can kind of break them down a little bit more. When we get to the input output unit, we talk about these things in great detail as well as all the connections. But again, this is just an overview. So input output, also known as I/O. Input is how you get information into the computer: keyboards, mice, touchpads, scanners, webcams, microphone. These are all input devices, while output devices allow us to see things coming out of the computer. So for example, a monitor, you're seeing the video right now. You might be hearing my voice, so you have speakers that you're listening to. These are output devices. So here's some common examples of input devices. Keyboard being probably the most common input device. Predates the mouse. When computers first came out, they had no attachments. So the very first kind of input device was a keyboard. It had a humongous connector that you plug in, but there were no mice. They weren't even invented yet. So eventually we wound up having mice that we could use. But for right now, keyboards are kind of the OG of easy to use input devices. And most keyboards are known as QWERTY keyboards, which you can adjust the settings in your settings, either in your PC or your Mac. The mouse, like I said, the first personal computer, did not have mice. They came out much later. And there's lots and lots of options for mice. I talked about Micro Center at the beginning of this live stream. And if you ever go to Micro Center, they have an entire aisle of just different mice, different keyboards, and aisles of this stuff. It's just insane and amazing and a wonderful place to go to if you have time and money to spend. So back to the mouse. Lots of different options for your mousing needs. Then we have scanners. Scanners allow you to take hard copy and turn it into soft copy. Webcams, which is, we're very familiar with webcams at this point in time, especially after COVID and the lockdown. This provides us a way to capture live video directly to the computer. Works with lots of different video conferencing apps. So for example, I had a Skype meeting earlier today, or a Zoom meeting. I think it was a Zoom meeting earlier today. Right now I'm using OBS to capture video, which then goes into our YouTube live stream. So kind of cool stuff there. Webcams can either be part of the computer, which is what I'm using, or they can be an external device, usually costing more money, that will also give you better resolution, better picture, and more options. So that was input. Now let's take a look at some output devices. And so, a computer would be pretty worthless if we didn't have a way to get information out of it. You put everything in there, but you want kind of to see results, right? You want to see a video you made. You want to hear music that you might have saved. You might want to be able to see, your Word presentation, your Word document, or print it out. So output is getting information out of the computer. And some common devices include monitors, printers, and speakers. This is an example of a monitor. It's your primary output device. It's considered soft copy meaning you can't actually touch the output. Now, you can touch the monitor. That's hardware. But the image on the monitor, right? The pictures on the monitor, this is considered soft copy because it lives in the digital world. Now, that doesn't mean you can't turn it into hard copy, which is what printers do, but monitors give us output in the form of soft copy. Of course, video does not work without display or video adapters. These allow us to see video output. Now, interestingly enough, last night I went to Micro Center myself and I picked up 4 video cards. The reason why I had to pick up 4 video cards is we were building 4 computers in the classroom, and they don't have built-in support. They don't have integrated video support. Some CPUs will have it built in, but these didn't. And so in order to see output, I had to go buy video cards. We put them in the computer, and so we could see the output from the video. Printers, this is an output device. If monitors gave you primarily or only soft copy, printers give you hard copy. This is stuff that you can touch. This is stuff that exists in the real world. You can crumple it up, throw it out, whatever, okay? And there are several printers on the market. We will have a separate unit just on printers. Yes, you didn't mishear me. We will have a separate unit just on printers. Printers and CompTIA have gone together forever, so you do need to know some basic printer stuff. It's tradition. So different types of printers are impact printers. These actually leave a mark on the paper. A thing strikes the ink ribbon. The ink ribbon strikes your paper or whatever you're printing it on, and it leaves a mark. We have inkjet printers, which shoot little drops of ink. They're like a bunch of little paintball guns. Thermal printers. If you've ever gotten a receipt from CVS, then you know what thermal printers do. They typically print receipts. They're very popular in retail stores and restaurants and things like that. More or less, they use heat to generate your output. Laser and LED printers. These will use lasers and toner. We will learn more about laser printing process later on in a different unit, and 3D printers, which you will learn about later, much later on in the input-output unit, as well as the printer unit. But for right now, just know that 3D printers are extremely cool. All right, audio device and sound card. These are a mix, right? You have audio out. So for example, you're hearing my voice, but as I'm recording it, we are doing audio in. So audio devices and sound card allow the computer to create audio output as well as turn audio output or analog information, sound waves, into digital information. So we got a couple of items that are kind of miscellaneous, don't really know where to put them as much, but we have a network interface card, which also is an input and output device. This takes networking information into the computer and allows you to communicate and see what's going on. And of course, it also sends information out. So it is an input and output device all rolled up into one. And they can be integrated, meaning they are built into the motherboard, which is much more common nowadays. Or it could be a card on its own. You can have an expansion card just for a network interface. Then we have, of course, the case. Cases come in form factors. You'll learn all about form factors when we start talking about motherboards. Cases can be very basic. So, for example, I've got 4 basic cases in my classroom. These are, I want to say, about 50, 60 bucks to buy the case. And you can go really crazy with some of the more expensive cases that are out there. Power supplies. These take DC power and turn it into AC power. Oh no, I'm take that back. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted right now in the classroom. But it takes AC power from the wall and converts it into DC power. Your computer and all digital devices require DC power to operate. All right, let's see what our timeline looks like right now. How long have we gone? Because I'm liking keeping these at about 30 minutes a pop. Does YouTube actually show me how long we've been going here? Kind of looking here. I think we're still good. All right, let's take a quick look at peripheral devices and connections. Has it been 25 minutes? All right. Well, I've just been told it's been 25 minutes, and I want to try to keep these, like I said, about 30 minutes each. So let me take a look real fast at our peripheral devices. Let me see if I can throw. That's not going to work. I was going to show you all where we're at, but we're at the end of miscellaneous. Tomorrow or Thursday, we'll see. We will continue our conversation. We'll look at peripheral devices and connections, a very brief look at USB, Firewire, Thunderbolt, Bluetooth, and RF. We also have to talk about some different types of operating systems, very basic kind of overview of what those are. Everything from desktop operating systems to mobile operating systems, things like that. And then finally, we have the introduction to troubleshooting portion. You need to know how to troubleshoot according to CompTIA. There are steps that they want you to know and the order that they want you to know them in, as well as my 5 areas where computer problems can happen. So with that, I am going to call it quits for the day. Hit a little outro music for you. Have a great day, and until later, have fun studying, and goodbye for now.